as soon as she points, we're live.
We've upgraded from the
We super have. This is way better than the, what did we have, on phone book or something?
I was confused with my podcast with the video. That's just the video. Wow.
Welcome everyone to Sudbury Politics, the show. So I'm Rachel Adrians here with my co-hosts Jeff McIntyre and Richard Eberhardt. So tonight we're live from the Alibi Room. It's our official launch show for our first podcast episode. Very excited to be here this evening too with our special guest Bill Crumplin. Great dude, really great dude. In addition to that, unique individual to interview because he's been running for office for the last 18 months on both the municipal election side and as well for the federal election. So we're very happy to have him here.
Yeah, we're very excited to get our show up and running as well. So we're going to have our regular podcast coming to you now. Every couple weeks, we're going to try and be live when possible, and mostly here from the Alibi Room. We're going to be examining all things local politics and federal politics, provincial politics, and how it impacts Sudbury as a whole.
Yeah, and if you don't have a chance to watch us on Facebook Live or come down here live to the Alibi Room, by the way, we have a live audience in the room here. Enthusiastic audience. So if you miss all that, you can still catch us in a pure podcast form on your favorite podcasting platform, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, whatever, and on our website as well, sudburypolitics.ca. So introduce us, Jeff McIntyre, strangely enough on the far left today, Rachel in the middle, and Richard here on the right. Between the three of us, we might not look at, we have over 50 years of direct campaign experience, and we've done sort of every job, really, political party staff, constituency office staff. We've managed campaigns. We've been working on the big air side, of the advertising side, and the ground side of campaigns. And we've also run for office, two of the three of us. So someday we'll actually win office somewhere and complete that massive list of things to accomplish. And we've worked for all the major political parties, so we try to keep a balanced view on our show, even though we've all got our own sort of perspectives and political beliefs. We try to be really balanced and open.
Okay, so kind of into our first official segment here, so we'll call this one The Hot Stuff. So we just wanted to thank you again for joining us at our official launch show and to, the big, massive crowd that we have here this evening with us.
Thank you, everybody.
So, for the hot stuff here, we're just taking this evening to kind of catch up on the hot issues that have been happening in Sudbury politics, kind of post the federal election wrapping up. So, of course, with that federal election, it changed, very little perhaps in our community, but had quite a wide impact on the country as a whole. So climate change, of course, was a big focus, as well as the leaders of the parties themselves. Locally, we found the campaign was a bit more of a sleeper here, and in the end, the local incumbents were re-elected. And none of the actual northeastern Ontario incumbents were defeated. So Richard, would you like to talk a bit more about the actual outcome in Sudbury?
Yeah, sure. So we had an Outlook show before the election day, right sort of at the last minute on the eve of the election, and we made some analysis there of what we thought might happen and what would be a win for the parties in Sudbury, and we basically called it, not that was particularly challenging to call it, that Paul Lefebvre would win in Sudbury, but we also looked at the other parties and where they would, potentially land. What would be a good result? So would the Conservatives, with a new candidate, Pierre Saint-Amand, would they still hold their ground? Would the Green Party, with Bill Crumplin as their candidate, and he'll be on in just a minute or two, would he be able to break through, maybe break up into third place, for example, which would be a very strong finish for the Greens? Would the NDP, if they can't win, would they be able to get close enough to the Liberal Party that it's very clear that the voters in Sudbury are sending a message giving them room to move. So what actually happened was, for the Conservatives, yes, they seem to be holding at about 10,000 votes, roughly 20%. That's relatively unchanged for the last several elections. They had a bit of a high point in 2011 when they had a majority government, but then it's kind of fallen back. Bill Crumplin came within 75 votes of getting the largest total that a Green Party candidate's had in Sudbury, so very close to that. And of course, I think that we'll be talking with Bill about the Green Party across the country and where the hopes compared to the actual success. For the NDP, if the hope was to get within a couple of thousand votes, didn't materialize. So Paul Lefebvre won a very convincing victory and won by over 6,000 votes. So really kind of tells a story in Sudbury that if we're watching for the riding to go back to a very stable and secure kind of seat for the Liberal Party, that this election did nothing to disrupt that. Nickel Belt was a bit different. Jeff,
Yeah.
you want to reflect on Sudbury or carry on?
Well, I think Sudbury, it was pretty much where everybody thought it was going to be. I don't think there's any big surprises in Sudbury. In Nickel Belt, I think, is where we saw the surprises. Ina Lamlin up about 2,000 votes. We had the PBC first time out get about 1,000 votes. Greens were up to 2,600 votes. They had a very good showing. Saray and the NDP both lost from their previous outings. I think we all had Mark Saray in a little bit of trouble in Nickel Belt. Turns out he did fairly well. Got his way through. He was one of the later ones to be called, but he's back. I think that was probably the most interesting riding because we had a candidate that wasn't kind of running the traditional script of a candidacy. So it was interesting to watch Steph Paquette come at it from a different angle, try and bring some new people into the political sphere, go against what people like us would generally have suggested. But it turned out it wasn't quite enough this time.
By comparison, Mark Saray ran the textbook backbench incumbent campaign. But what's interesting to me is that all the attention that's been put on strategic voting, it didn't materialize at all in Nickel Belt. In fact, it kind of went the other way. That Saray lost ground, Paquette lost ground, the exact same number of votes cast year over year. The votes were picked up on the right and by Casey Lalonde of the Green Party.
Yeah. I think one of the interesting aspects of this election was, and something I probably want to talk to Bill about, is usually we see a Green drop off 3 days before the ballot box. We didn't see that this time. We saw the Greens hold their numbers for the last week of the election straight through to the ballot box. And that's a big change for where they're at. So we haven't seen that last minute strategic vote drop off for the Greens. So.
Yeah, and I know as well we had mentioned before with advance voting, with the voter turnout being so high for that weekend, that we thought perhaps that would play a factor into how kind of Nickel Belt ended up voting. But because with the NDP kind of being on a bit of a surge at that point, but as we saw, Mark did come out on top. So.
Yeah.
So we have a minority government. Everyone knows that, and it does mean a few things. Rachel, what does the early indications from minority look like for us? What are the plays that are happening in Ottawa?
So I think right now, of course, we heard the term, coalition government thrown out quite a lot in comparison to minority government, kind of leading up to the election. So I think, in the minority government situation we're in right now, it doesn't look like the Liberals are going to want to work with the New Democrats, perhaps, to form that official coalition, or perhaps to put those NDP members more into cabinet. So I think they were hoping for more of that when it comes to the New Democrats, and I think they're a bit out of luck that way. Of course, with the Conservatives, they're still saying with Scheer that I think they're still hoping to kind of come out on top, and maybe in some time you hear them talking about still really trying to overthrow Trudeau, and perhaps at some point whether or not that's going to lead it into, you know, another election territory. But I definitely don't think, of course, the Liberals wouldn't be the one to call that, and I don't think the New Democrats are going to want to be the ones to do that. So it's a bit interesting that way. And I think as well, kind of lots of conversations are happening right now about unity in general when it comes to the federal politics scene. And, you know, we're seeing with Alberta right now and Wexit that way, the potential for, you know, talks about unity that way and them kind of wanting to separate. So it's an interesting time and interesting conversations that are happening that way.
Between now and our next show, the Prime Minister is going to name a cabinet, actually the day before our next show, so that'll be interesting. And the real question is what happens with the Northern Ontario seats? Is there a Northern Ontario MP named to cabinet? Is Paula Fave named to cabinet? Because in my opinion, he's the only Northern Ontario Liberal MP that would be qualified or would be asked to sit in cabinet based on who's sitting across the province. So that's one big question, and we've heard some buzz. There's going to be some shifts. The cabinet's not going to stay the same. So is there room now with Ralph Goodale, male, and Amarjeet Sohi, both male cabinet ministers, out, creates room for exactly two males. You alluded to Andrew Scheer a little bit, and of course, so it will be interesting when we get a chance to swing back to our friends at the Conservative Party, how they're reacting to the local Conservatives, reacting to what's happening on the federal scene when it comes to Andrew Scheer. There's some questions about his leadership, obviously, and some uncertainty. My guess is when the House reconvenes and the Conservative Party is, effectively taking on the government, that those fears are probably going to end up not really materializing. That we have a couple more years. We have Andrew Scheer with us till the next election, but we do not have Elizabeth May with us till the next election.
Yes.
The first of the party leaders to step down.
Big news.
Was that a shock to you?
I wouldn't say a shock. I think we're hearing a lot about her potentially running for speaker. I think more her coming out and saying that expect that maybe in 2023 the next election cycle. I think that would have been more of a shock to me if she was saying she was going to go for that right now. But I wouldn't say as much leader. I mean, very interesting. The interim leader Joanne Roberts has been appointed. Don't know as much about her. So I don't know if you have thoughts on that, or
she's a previous candidate, an unsuccessful candidate for the Green Party, and when you look across the people that have analyzed where the Greens can go, I mean, they don't have a large elected caucus, and not all of the large elected caucus. We're looking forward to talking to Bill about this.
Yeah, for sure.
As soon as Jeff gets back, he went running up the street, and he'll be back in a minute. And meanwhile, the ice in his drink is melting away.
More for us.
Yeah, more for us. I just think it's important to recognize that the other leader in the House, Jagmeet Singh, also has some explaining to do to his caucus and his supporters. And if it's not about why the party didn't succeed in Quebec, if it's not about what happened in Ontario when the votes were high, it at the very least is, what are you going to do now organizationally to stop the bleeding within the caucus? I mean, you don't go to another election, you lose another 4 or 5 seats. Now you're down to 12. Maybe you lose 3 or 4 more. Now you don't have a party anymore. The NDP's been on a downward swing. I mean, it's hard to come. They could have either gone up to government or started losing seats in 2011, so they went the other way. Now we're down to 26. So the NDP's going to have to really perform well in the House, and Singh did not perform well in the House in the last few months before the election was called when he finally got a seat.
Yeah, I think that's a big moment for him is when that kind of resumes and we see how he plays out there.
So we're killing time here on Sudbury Politics, the show, because we have lost one of our hosts. But I think what we're going to do is we're going to introduce our guest and carry on while Jeff, I'm sure, is literally running up the street. He'll be back in hopefully any time now in a minute. But when he gets back, we'll have our guest already introduced. So I just think to bridge the gap between what we were just talking about, our segment on hot stuff, and our guest. It's important to say we spent all this time talking about municipal politics and provincial politics. We've spent all this time talking about federal politics and no time at all talking about municipal politics or provincial politics.
Right.
So as we move on to our next show in a couple weeks' time, we're definitely going to be turning our attention to that. But now Jeff's back. Hey, you made it. Yes.
Technical difficulties, but I'm back on the show.
Yes. We might have thought we had kicked him off the show.
They were done with me.
Literally. He said the wrong thing about nickel belt and then he was off the island. But no, he's back.
Got your back over there.
Just in time. Just in time for us to introduce our guest.
Yes.
So, why don't you... Oh, it's okay. Okay. We'll let Jeff introduce.
Yeah.
Well, one of the great things about being here at the Alibi Room is they've developed a cocktail for our terrific guest tonight, Bill Crumplin. So if Bill wants to come in and join us, we can start with a little toast.
You all right?
Cheers.
Yeah, cheers to Bill.
To Crumplin.
And paper straws.
Yes, paper straws.
We're drinking the Adios. Fantastic cocktail.
This is great. Oh, get him.
Delicious.
Getting
Thank
a little bit
you.
tighter.
Scary delicious.
That is good.
Adios, a great cocktail for a green candidate because we're going to say adios to
Elizabeth
the
Mayer.
carbon past.
Okay.
Bill's run municipally, provincially, and federally now, so he has a great idea of what it is to be a candidate in a race, and with all that's happened with the Green Party recently, great timing to have Bill on as well.
Well, it's good to be here.
Yeah.
This is going to be fun.
Yeah,
and,
we're excited to have you.
Yeah.
So, Bill, you've run municipally, but before that, you ran for the Green Party provincially. So you've really seen all three sides of the political spectrum in the last 18 months. Quite a ride.
It has been.
To get you started, I'm sure that you went into this with a certain sense of our community or maybe how democracy works in general. Now you've gone around this 3 times around the turnstile. How's your perspective changed?
Politics is a dirty game. That's the first thing I would say. And politics is an expensive game. You can have all the ideas you want. You can have a good team, but if you don't have the money to pay for advertising, it's really difficult to break through. That's sort of, I guess it's the money. It's the financial thing that has really struck me the most. And that concerns me because that means that we're actually limiting who can be in government. You have to have the financial backing, and that's really difficult to do, particularly when you're the fourth party.
Yeah, that's actually interesting because you run now mayorally and for a party. And there's a difference there, right? There is a little bit of help from the party. You've got a little bit of an infrastructure, even though the Green Party's infrastructure is still developing, I'd say.
Yes, it is.
And then as a mayoral candidate, you're coming at it with, the people you can assemble and the resources you can assemble. And you don't have a policy to start from. You have to develop that on your own. What were the differences there?
Well, that was a big difference. After the provincial election, I was sitting at home with the dog and just relaxing and thinking, this is great. And the phone rang, and it was a friend of mine said, we want you to run for mayor. And I laughed and laughed and laughed. And no, we're serious. And I said, okay, well, let's go for coffee. So the mayoral thing was really difficult because, yes, I had to come up with a platform. I had to find a campaign manager on a shoestring budget, and I was very fortunate to do that. I had a very strong campaign manager. But one of the big things with municipal politics versus provincial and federal, again, the financial animal comes back into it. Nobody gets a tax benefit for helping me out as a mayoral candidate. Mm-hmm. Whereas at the federal and the provincial level, you do in fact get some tax credit for donations you make. So that was difficult. And, you know, the mayoral run cost me a lot of
Yeah, well, and that's into an run. It is expensive. You're double it running that you in a federal run. You don't have that party support. You don't have the taxpayer support. And then for municipal candidates on the council side,
down. And if you can hear me now, it means you've been hearing me the whole time. And I apologize profusely to everybody. We are.
Okay.
And we didn't even swear that much.
I know. I don't think we did at all.
What was thinking?
Yeah.
All right.
so it looks like we may have gone down for a bit. I think we're back live again. Apologies, some technical difficulties figuring out the new setup, but I think we're rolling again now. So you were talking about the differences in municipal and federal elections funding. So if you want to pick up from there.
I'll see what I can do. That was a bit of a break.
Bit of a break.
Yeah, no. When this happens in the lecture hall, students call it a Crumplin moment. But that's usually when, I seize up.
We will give you the blame for it then.
Rachel was wondering about the nomination process.
Yes.
How did you find that? Sorry,
Well, I guess a little unique because I've seen you run, in the federal, and then I had the opportunity working in the city clerk's office at the time of the municipal election to be there for your mayoral nomination when you filed. So two completely different processes. Vetting, of course, different for the party, for the municipal election. So I just thought it might be interesting for you to just kind of talk about the differences and what you liked and maybe didn't like about each. I have a loaded question, but just a little bit on that,
No, the both processes were fine.
Yeah.
The municipal process I found much cozier. a lot of people think that City Hall is not friendly, but I found it exceptionally friendly.
Well, especially those clerk staff, right?
Well, exactly.
Sorry.
Exactly. No, I really enjoyed the chatting with the staff in City Hall, and I found everybody bent over backwards to try to help me out and ask. City staff can't answer every question. They're bound by rules and regulations. But it was nice to have a warm body, a smile, and somebody to talk to. Whereas with both the provincial and the federal, even though it's two different distinct parts of the Green Party, it's all done at arm's length. You get the forms, you fill them out, you mail them in. It's not as friendly a process. And I found that the federal riding very difficult, the federal run really difficult, once I was the candidate, to get 100 signatures.
Okay.
100 signatures was not easy to do. I thought it would be simple.
Yep.
But there were a number of times when my campaign manager and I were out trying to collect signatures, and people would see us coming with the clipboard and they turn around and run away, or they would yell no without us even asking or letting them know what we were doing. So that was quite a shock to me.
David Popescu can do it. And so anytime, I know, no offense, because you're not the first person I've heard, you're not the first candidate I've heard say this is a challenging thing to do. So in my role as an organizer at one time for the party, when someone would tell me, oh, these signatures are so hard to get, I would start in the long process of talking about this candidate we have in Sudbury who manages to get these signatures every time, and stop whining and go get the signatures.
Yeah.
But at this point, I get it. Why do people not want to engage with someone with a clipboard anymore? I can't imagine.
Well, mayoral, of course, you're looking at 25,
Yeah.
right, as opposed to the 100.
Yeah.
So, did you find was the clipboard still intimidating, or
No,
was
I just
it,
went up and down my street. That was easy. No, and if you haven't been by John Street when I've been running on an election, you haven't been on a political street, because my signs, whether they're mayoral or green, they're up and down the entire street.
I do remember because I lived right there. Yeah, you rock that street.
That's actually one of the interesting things I find about campaigning or working on a campaign, especially for somebody that's relatively new to it. This is your first few campaigns. Mm-hmm. The actual door knocking and meeting people at random. Mm-hmm. It's an interesting experience.
It is.
You get a lot of interesting. What did you learn from that piece?
I learned that you have to have a tough skin. Not everybody is open to you knocking on the door. I don't think it's against politicians. I think at this point in our society, people are so, I'll use the word introverted. Their life is in the palm of their hands, and they don't want somebody to knock on the door. They're unaccustomed to having face-to-face discussions, and that makes it difficult. And along that line, I'm back in the classroom this week. A colleague of mine is on medical leave, so my director asked me to come back. So, so much for my sabbatical. It's over. But I was in the classroom, and today, the way my colleague has it set up, Thursdays are small groups where people are working on their questions on their computer in a group. No, that's not how I did. I like to have readings, and we would have a discussion, and it was free flowing, and it was a lot of fun. So I was standing there for about a half an hour watching them work, and there's no discussion because they're using Google Docs, and they're each adding or subtracting from the Google Doc. Mm-hmm. And I thought, is this what society's come from? And you might think, what am I talking about here, Jeff? But I think that is sneaking into society, and people really are uncomfortable now with face-to-face interaction.
Well, I think that's becoming really clear. You even just hiring or dealing with people that are coming into the workforce, we're hearing from companies that they're not willing to pick up the phone. Mm-hmm. It's just not something they're accustomed to or take voicemails. So I can see as a political campaign that making things different and difficult.
Yeah. And the other thing that I noticed, and just random, Monday back in the classroom, and they knew that I was a recent candidate, and we're talking a little bit about the federal campaign, and I asked them, there were 35 or so students, their first year, okay, but they're supposedly smart and savvy because they all are connected right in the palm of their hand. they actually, I asked them, okay, who can tell me who the leaders of the federal parties are? Well, they got Trudeau, they got Elizabeth May, and they struggled. They struggled. They could get Singh, and finally one guy said Andrew Scheer, and I thought, really? The election is 2 weeks over. This was all over the media, and this group of university students could not identify like that the leaders of the federal parties.
But was it over their media? Right, because that's
Well,
one of the
that's-
things is that your
yeah.
media is now run through a filter of your own choosing, right? Or at least people believe it's of their own choosing. In a lot of cases, it's someone else's filter
Yeah.
that they're laying over you. That because you fit a certain age group and you buy a certain pair of shoes, here's a media stream for you that we've chosen. And so that's that's going to continue to be a problem, I think, for politics in this country and other Western democracies, is that it's not a straight stream of just like my press release and your press release get put in order of receipt by this news organization. It's we think that you want to read about Bill Crumplin because you liked an article about trees 3 weeks ago, and I clicked on something about a union, and so therefore I get a Jagmeet Singh ad, and I don't see what Bill Crumplin has to say.
Yeah.
And to be fair to your students, Scheer might be the shortest lived of all those leadership candidates.
Yes, he might be, but it was a sobering moment, Jeff.
Yeah.
Because when I was a first-year university student, I knew
Yeah.
that stuff. That was what we did.
Yeah.
We paid attention. But when I've been trying to meet and get the millennials to pay attention and to vote. And I've said to a number of them, I said, how do I reach you? And they kind of giggle. I said, no, you guys, your generation, you're as slippery as eels.
Yeah.
This is a serious question. How do I reach you? And I don't know if they don't know how I can reach them or if they don't want to tell me. But I see every time my generation understands something, say like Facebook, they go to Twitter. So you try to do Twitter, they go to Instagram. Now they're doing TikTok. So, like, what the hell?
We've been debating TikTok for weeks.
Well, I was being a bit facetious. I think the realism of that is, I don't think Scheer did connect with that generation, right? And whether the party did the work or not to find that out, they didn't make that connection, and you could see it in the polls. Where the NDP or where the Greens have picked up, and it's obvious because you look at, they've done years and years of these high school mock votes, and the Greens always do fantastic. I don't know if we saw the leadership of the Conservatives present a platform that appeals to that group.
Well, the platform came out so late, Jeff.
I mean more on the social side,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
He kind of failed on the coming out with a strong thing on abortion or a strong position. And, when we look at that leadership, May's been able to make that connection. Trudeau's been able to make that connection. Obviously, Jagmeet Singh was able to make that connection. What does this say about the future leadership of, say, the Green Party?
Well, it's quite an interesting bit of segue there.
I worked my way there hard.
I was gonna ask.
Okay, you guys were talking a little bit earlier. One of you, the guys asked Rachel was she surprised about what Elizabeth May has done. No, it's not a surprise, but the timing I felt was poor. I know what she's up to in general. I know what her hopes are. I know that she's tired. I can't believe how much energy that woman has. She was here in August. I spent most of the day with her. At one point when she was doing 2 radio interviews, I went home for a nap. And then I met her later. So she's ready for a change. But I feel that one of the big problems in the Green Party right now is that whether it's Elizabeth or the executive or whomever, we haven't been grooming anybody. There's a vacuum. And with her stepping down, even before the throne speech is out, like what happens if Parliament dissolves, 6 weeks from now? We're screwed.
It's not exactly like you guys have a menu of candidates to go after, right?
No. Yeah. So I'm disappointed. I'm not necessarily surprised. I was hoping that she would stay on as leader in case we have an election in the next year and a half or 2 years. I was really hoping for that. like each of the leaders, she did make a few errors through the campaign. Locally, I was really pleased that Casey and I were able to hold on the last couple of weeks, because in other situations, other ridings, the Greens started to lose the traction that they had found. So, I think it's going to be difficult for us to find a new leader, particularly somebody who's known across the country. There's Alex Tyrell from Quebec, the Quebec leader. He's hungry for it. He wants to do it. He's not my kind of green guy. Strike that.
We are live, my friend. And the
Your internet,
7
please
people
cut
that are
that.
watching the stream right now will not forget that.
As
Well,
long as he's not one of them.
well, on that note, I will say, Bill, it was an absolute pleasure having you on. We appreciate it, and thank you sincerely.
Well, thank you for
Thank
having
you.
me. It's a lot of fun, guys. I've
Thanks, Bill.
We are over time, but we have one last little segment for you. Jeff, you want to tell us about it?
Yeah, so we thought we'd add a little bit of fun to the end, and given every Politico likes to give unsolicited advice, this is our unsolicited letter of advice to different groups within the city or the political community. So, Dear Sudbury Star comment section. I really don't care.
You should write that. You should write that in a paper letter, just to be as ironic as possible.
Here's mine. Dear Minister Rickford and the Ford government, instead of posting gas pump stickers in an attempt to stick it to the Liberals and remind the people of Ontario how much this job-killing regressive carbon tax costs, you should instead, 1, refrain from using freedom of expression as a defense to posting factually inaccurate stickers, and 2, quit wasting time stating that there's actually no evidence to support the fact that the stickers are not sticking, and instead purchase a new adhesive.
My letter is to the Chamber of Commerce of Sudbury. So if you watched our earlier coverage, you saw our evening coverage after the debates. And I bet Bill has thoughts about this too. We give a lot of credibility to the Chamber of Commerce as the host of the major debate in the Sudbury riding and the Nickel Belt riding whenever there's a provincial or federal election, and same thing goes for the municipal election. They host the mayor's debates, well, they could do better. I mean, they're not engaging, and they do not ask the best possible questions. So my letter goes like this: Dear Sudbury Chamber of Commerce, your debates suck. Maybe call us. We can give you some advice about how to get some engaging formatting, some better questions that'll serve not only your members better, but the community as a whole.
Well, that's it, folks, for our first regular episode of the Sudbury Politics The Show podcast. So tune in from 2 weeks from now for our next episode.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.